So thank you all for joining us for the last session that we'll be together for Mifgash. When we were planning Mifgash, we were trying to be very thoughtful about finding balance between internal voices and outside voices to add insight to our work. And we always try to bring thought leaders from outside of the JCC movement, but certainly inside the Jewish landscape, to help introduce ideas that will stimulate our thinking, get us to maybe wrestle with some new ways of thinking about things, and we are really honored to have Sandy Cardin here with us this afternoon. At yesterday's Innovation Incubator, which was amazing, we were fortunate to have three amazing voices in today's Jewish philanthropic landscape join us when we had Harleen, Mark, and Gary. And I think we got a lot of perspective from them, and I'm thrilled that we have Sandy here today to add a little bit more to our conversation and to share his reflections about North American Jewish life today and as he sees it in the near future. As most of you know, or all of you know, I'm sure, Sandy is president of the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Foundation and is drawing upon more than 20 years of professional experience in the nonprofit sector. He is a frequent speaker on topics that I think are quite relevant to us all of the time. Things like catalytic grant making, innovative program building, Jewish identity, young adult engagement, and Israel. He has served on many boards and is currently the chair of Leading Edge. And I think you heard Brian and I remark that we had Gali Cooks here for our board retreat, talking to us about talent. And Brian and I had an opportunity to have lunch with Sandy and spent a little bit more time talking about and getting his reflections on what that building block may look like for us as we move forward. I'm not going to read Sandy's full bio. He actually asked for no introduction, but I insisted. So I'm going to invite you to read it in your Schedulinea or on the app. But I also just want to share that, as most of you I'm sure know the news, Sandy has announced that he's going to be retiring from his role, but staying on as a special advisor to the Schusterman Foundation. And we are just so fortunate to have you here with us. So I'm going to turn it over and I'll have a couple of remarks afterwards, but welcome, Sandy.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you. And thanks to all of you who have braved the weather predictions and stayed in Miami, not to rush home to beat the polar vortex, I guess, that is allegedly coming to different places. I, of course, want to start not just by thanking Jennifer and Brian and others, but to, of course, share my condolences and those of the Schusterman family and the Schusterman Family Foundation to Daron and his family for his loss. It's a difficult time whenever we lose a parent, and I know all of our thoughts and prayers go out to Daron and his family during this time. I think it's important to know, as Jennifer mentioned, that I recently have announced a transition. I'm not sure retirement is necessarily the right word, and senior advisor is not a full-time job. So if any of you are hiring, I'll give you my email address. The more important thing is that since I'm no longer president of the foundation, you don't have to be nice to me anymore. You know, they tell the story that when you're president of a foundation, you're suddenly great looking and smart and the funniest guy in the room. None of that. So all that has to go. You can treat me like a regular person. I was really flattered by Daron when asked to present to you. And we had a conversation, and he talked about what I spoke to the board last year in Houston. And so some of the things I'm going to say this morning or this afternoon are things that I said in Houston to the JCCA board. But I think it's important that you hear them, you particularly hear them from me as a perspective, I think an outside perspective of the importance of the JCCs and the JCCA as in the role of Jewish life moving forward. I'm not really going to talk about the future of North American Jewry. I don't know that I have any particularly unique or special insights into that than everyone else in this room. I'm happy, we'll have some question and answers, and I'm happy to share my thoughts and perspectives on that. I think, as we all know, we're living in an incredibly challenging time in every respect. And I think that the good news and the optimistic element of that is that in difficult times like these, it's the Jewish people that tend to pull together, to work together, and to lead the world to a better place. And my hope is that we, as American Jews, and certainly Jewish communities around the world, in the state of Israel, we will rise to that challenge, and we will, in fact, continue our biblical imperative of being a light into the nations. And it's that thought that keeps me going every single day, that we are part of the people who need to be the solution, not part of the problem. And when I think about what that means in terms of how do we create a sense of community and how do we pull together, I think about lots of organizations and lots of places where Jews gather. And I think there are no more important institutions in certainly American Jewish life. And I'll talk primarily about American Jewish life, but we can talk during questions about Israel and the rest of the diaspora. But I don't think there are any institutions that are more important than JCCs. I've said this to a couple of groups. I will say it again very, very specifically and directly to you. I believe that directors of JCCs can count themselves, and you are, the 21st century Kohanim. And I think you really need to embrace that role. I think you need to understand that we are in a paradigmatic shift of Jewish life, of Jewish community, and that each of you plays a role similar to what the Kohanim played as we created Rabbinic Judaism in Yavna and after. There, as you know the story of Yavna and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai being carried out of Jerusalem in the coffin and reestablishing Jewish life in Yavna. And suddenly, obviously, there was no access to the temple, there was no temple. Sacrificial Judaism, that kind of Judaism, was no longer going to exist. A new Judaism needed to be created. And what we practice, what was created then and what we practice today, in many respects, we consider Rabbinic Judaism. There had to be leaders of that. And we took the biblical understanding of the tribes and the roles of Jews, and the Kohanim saw themselves in a special role as leaders, as a role of priests. And I think that that's the way you need to think about yourselves as you move about the work that you're doing. You're not simply running institutions. You're not simply managing. You're not simply making a home or a place where people can gather, where people can find meaning, where people can find spiritual and physical fulfillment. You are running institutions that are at the center of the community building that we need in America. And what's special about JCCs, in my mind, as opposed to other comparable organizations, particularly synagogues, is that the JCC, by the non-denominational nature, is at the forefront of what it means to build community today. And building the kind of community that I think that particularly our young people are interested in which our young people are interested in participating. It's an open community. It's a community that wrestles with the universal versus the particularistic, but champions and celebrates both. That understands the beauty and the majesty of being particular, of being Jewish in the community, but also understands that it's not a closed community and that we have a responsibility not only to ourselves, but to the community at large. That's, in essence, right? That is the JCC story. That is your story. I'm reminded of conversations I used to have with my friends in the Reconstructionist movement. And I would go to them and they would say, I would say, you know, I don't quite understand. We know you have a bad name, but they don't really want to change the name. So we say, okay. But I have a suggestion. And they said, what's that? And I said, you should change your name to just Jewish. And they looked at me as if I was, or am, crazy. And I said, well, I think there are two elements of this. Number one, you're the largest denomination in America and don't even know it. Right? You don't know it, you don't champion it. But when you get all these Pew and other kinds of surveys and you get everybody saying they're just Jewish, what are they really saying? They're saying if they knew theology, the theological, they're closer to Reconstructionism than they are to Reform, Conservative, or Orthodoxy. Right? Because Reconstructionism at its essence is sort of the just Jewish piece with other elements combined to it. So they could be the largest denomination right away if they wish to be. But they didn't because they feel a need, the Reconstructionist movement feels a need to compete, if you will, with other movements, with the Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. They need to differentiate themselves within the theological world. I understand that. It's not a decision that I would make if I were on the inside, but I understand perspective. The JCCs, we don't have that problem. That's not our issue. There's no competition for us theologically or ideologically. What is out there for us is Judaism and building of the Jewish community and doing it in an open and inclusive way. And that's what the JCC has always stood for. And that's what puts the JCC at the vanguard of where we are today in terms of what it means to build community and to energize and excite Jewish life. You're there. So I come back to the fact you think of yourselves however you think of what you think when you go into the office every day. I promise you that if you take just a minute and think, I'm a Kohen of the new Jewish religion, you're going to feel a little uplifted, you're going to feel inspired, and you're going to feel motivated to do the work that we need you to do in order for us to achieve the full potential of Jewish people and Jewish life in America and around the world. In terms of JCCs, how JCCs are practicing the work that you do every day, I want to just cover quickly sort of the 5 points I share with your board because I think they are as relevant today as they were a year ago. And I know from talking to Daron and others that you've made some great strides in all of them. The first is sell what you're good at. Focus. In other words, understand where the strengths of your organizations are, the strengths of your institutions are, and double down on those. You have an incredibly complicated and challenging job. You have the range of activities for which you're responsible is already overwhelming and virtually impossible. How you do your work, I don't understand, frankly. It's just incredible. And then on top of it, on top of the range of activities that you're expected to oversee and implement safely and with excellence and with knowledge, is the diverse community that walks through your door every single day. What is it, 1.5 million come through the doors every day, 1 million of whom are Jewish? I mean, this is an audience that no other Jewish institution has, in terms both of the size of the audience and in terms of the diversity of the audience. So you take those two factors together, and anyone who suggests that running a JCC or being a JCC executive is not the most challenging job in the Jewish world is just not being realistic about what you need to do every single day to make your institutions work and to please the members that you have and the communities that you're serving. So the best I can tell you is I know you have a wide range, I know you have a diverse constituency, I know there are lots of pressures from everywhere, but the best you can, where can you find your brightest spots in your institutions and focus and do them well. And think about how you can partner with other institutions in your communities to do some other things. To tell you a crazy story, we didn't do it, but another crazy story, is I was, for those of you who may not know, the JCC in Tulsa is named for Charles Schusterman of blessed memory, and Tulsa is a small town. And so we have a campus. Calling it a campus is stretching it a bit. We have several buildings, and within the building is the JCC and the day school, Mizell Academy. And Mizell Academy is K through 5, and it does a perfectly good job. It's a good school. I'm not going to stand here and suggest it's an excellent school, but it does a good school, and I believe it's very, very important to the community of Tulsa, because I actually think day schools, in many regards, are canaries in the mine. Meaning that if we lose our day schools, And certainly if we lose Jewish preschools, we're losing something in the nature of our community. So they're very, very important, even before you get to the educational piece. And so the rabbi of the Reform Temple in Tulsa said to me, you know, you do a lousy job of teaching Hebrew at the day school. And I said, well, okay, I'm not sure I would necessarily agree lousy, but we could certainly do better. And he said, well, we do a better job at the temple in our 2-day-a-week Hebrew school teaching Hebrew than you do at the day school. I said, well, you know what? I said, then we should stop teaching Hebrew school at the day school, and we should let you teach all the children in Tulsa Hebrew, because there aren't that many, right? So he looked at me and said, what are you talking about? How can you have a day school that doesn't teach Hebrew? And I said, it's easy, because the day school is the best Jewish institution in the community to serve that purpose. Let's find the best Jewish organization in the community to serve the purpose, and let's collaborate and make it work. There's no reason for us to teach it poorly if you're teaching it well. Now, even in Tulsa, I was not able to make that point, okay? And I've tried in Kansas City, because folks in Kansas City invited me up to help them. I made the same argument, and I've made the same pitch in lots of different communities. So the communities, it's a very difficult one to think about. But in your roles, if you think about it and you put it out there and you work within your communities, your professional colleagues, and your volunteer leaders, maybe there's a way to do this. We don't all have to do everything, even if that's the way we've done it for the last 75 years. There are ways for us. We need to think at a more communal level. We need to understand what is it that we want out of our communities, and what are the best institutions to provide each piece of the puzzle. And if the historical answer to that is an institution that's not doing it very well when some other institution is doing it better or has the potential to do it better, then let's go in that direction. And I think if we can figure out how we can help our communities think that way, JCCs will actually be a huge beneficiary of that, because it will allow you to do the things that you do well, with excellence and with meaning, and will be able to share other responsibilities throughout the community through institutions that may be willing to take it and could lead us communally in a different direction. Second is, of course, something we were talking with Brian and Jennifer. I was talking to Brian and Jennifer at lunch about, in terms of Leading Edge and others, is investing in people, hiring and developing people. That's critical, right? Your institutions depend on the people who are inside of it, the people that are meeting, greeting, making it a welcoming environment from the minute they show up, Jewish or otherwise, to every element of the work that you do. And then once people are on your team, we need to help them understand that they're valued, that they're meaning, that their jobs are full of value, that they are valued, and we value them professionally and personally. Now, I know that many of you do that very well within your own institutions and with in some places, your own communities. What we were talking a bit with Brian about, I didn't share it, although I'm sure he knows, is something at Leading Edge we're working on called the Talent Alliance. How many of you have ever heard of Talent Alliance? Just a couple? So, Talent Alliance was actually something that began at the Schusterman Foundation. We, because of our relationship with BBYO, with Hillel, and with Moishe House, because we're a major funder of all three organizations, we said we want you to come together and think about how do you create a professional unit so that anyone that works in your organization can move to any of the other two organizations without losing any of their vesting rights, in any way thinking that they're a member of the community, a professional member of the community, and that their career path is not only in BBYO or Hillel or Moishe House, their career path is throughout the Jewish communal work. And that we will applaud, not criticize, people who move to a new position that gives them greater influence and greater authority, since my view is that people should move to whatever role they can that maximizes their competencies and their abilities. And it doesn't matter what organization they're doing. So we need to think about the Jewish community as one, from this perspective, as one big institution, as one big employer. And it's incumbent upon all of us to move people around, to train them, and to help them understand where they can go in their next step of their careers. And again, as a huge, huge employer, perhaps I dare say the largest employer in the Jewish world, the JCCs have a key role to play in that. And that if we can find a way communally to have a discussion, it's beginning. I know many of you know David Shapiro out of Pittsburgh, and this is really his big area, is this whole area of professional development. Leading Edge is thinking about it. Others are thinking about it. This is a critical piece of the puzzle, and I think you're in a great position to help that conversation continue, move forward, and to benefit from it, both from people who will be coming in to your institutions and people that you can help proceed in their careers. And I think your employees will feel valued and they will appreciate the work in that area. Third is the idea of embracing diversity. Like I said, there's no more diverse institution in American Jewish life, whether it be the activities or the people that are coming, than the JCCs. When we think about Jews of color, we think about LGBTQ, we think certainly about gender. This is a place, JCCs are and need to publicize themselves as a place that celebrates the diversity of the Jewish community, that recognizes the amazing spark in every Jew, that recognizes and celebrates all those who wish to throw their lot in with the Jewish people, whether they're interested in converting or simply being a part of a family that has a Jewish essence to it, even though they may not choose to be Jewish themselves. These are all things that you see every day, way more than I do, in your institutions, in your programs. And the key here is that is a huge benefit. That is a huge advantage that you have as we think about building Jewish community and the Jewish community of the future. We need to celebrate that more. And you are in a great position to do that. We were also, I was talking to Joel a little bit at lunch too about the JCC being not just an open door, but a staircase. Right? Understanding that the JCC, it's not enough for us just to say the JCC is a welcoming place where you can sort of explore what it is to be Jewish and meet other needs that you may have, spiritual, intellectual, physical, whatever it may be. But we need to think about how we position and publicize the JCCs as a staircase to helping people increase their engagement in Jewish life as they choose to and at the rate that they wish to and in a way that is supportive. Not having people think about they don't know enough about this, or they're not kosher enough, or they're not observant enough. That language is not going to work, as you all know, in the future. It doesn't work now. It's never really worked. But what we need to do is help people understand where they are, value where they are, they understand that their expression of Judaism is an authentic expression of Judaism. It's their expression. And how do we help them understand what their views are and their expressions of Judaism? How do they fit within Jewish texts, within Jewish teachings, within Jewish communal life? And how do we weave them all together so that they are validated and they are made to feel welcome and the community benefits from their engagement in it and from the engagement of their families, because hopefully they will bring their families along as well. And then last, which is a corollary to that, is the JCCs. What you have now in front of you as the Kohanim of the 21st century is the opportunity to define what it means to be Jewish in the 21st century. That is your role. It's not about serving members, right? I know you need to do that, and I know you need to keep the doors open, and I know you need to have membership fees and membership dues, and I know that philanthropists, I wasn't here for the session yesterday, but I'm sure they asked you all the right questions, but I don't know whether the philanthropic community is famous for saying, you know, you really need to be self-sustaining. Right? Tell me how you're self-sustaining. Where's your revenue, right? And yet, when it comes to the JCCs, you all are amazing in terms of the revenue you raise. You are, by and large, self-sustaining institutions. Philanthropists should be throwing their money at you. Right? Doesn't that make sense? If that's the standard, if they're going to say we only want to support institutions that have the ability to raise their own revenue, this is it. And yet, what do? They hem, they haul. This isn't right. That isn't right. And 87 million reasons why they don't give you any money. I think you really need to call nicely Call them on that, right? Because you are leading in that area. And so it's very, very important. And so you've got this role, besides this administrative, managerial role, you have this role of helping to define Judaism in the 21st century. And I hope you embrace it. I said to the, also to the board that, and if it got me in trouble, I haven't heard anybody, I haven't had any death threats, so it's probably okay, is that I actually think opening, and I know many of you have, there was a big argument in Tulsa about whether the Jewish Community Center could host religious events. Right? That was the big struggle. The synagogue and the temple said, no, you can't, those are religious, you have to be at the synagogue and the temple. Tulsa ultimately dealt with it in a way that the JCC can, in part because Chabad chose to use it, and that sort of set the definition of religious events. But the notion is, embrace that. In other words, if in your community that's not okay, if that's still a conversation that's going on in your community, I urge you to find a way to have that conversation with the clergy of your community, with the federation, whoever the powers that may be. Because people want a holistic approach. I believe people want a holistic approach. And they want to know, they don't want to think about an institution like the JCC as a place they go only for one thing. Especially if we're trying to build Jewish identity and Jewish community. How do you build Jewish identity and Jewish community if you say, well, that's great, we want you to be part of it, but we're only going to meet this part of your need, right? We're not going to be there. We're going to be there for preschool. We're going to be there for kindergarten. We're going to be there for camp, right? We're going to be there for all these other things, but whoa, when it comes to B'nai Mitzvah and marriage, we're not going to be there. You have to go someplace else. It doesn't make sense, right? And it's not that it's an institutional boundary. It doesn't make sense for the building of the Jewish community that we want, and it doesn't make sense to our consumer, our customer, our Jewish person and their families. So let's move past it. Synagogues are fantastic institutions in their own right. They too can build communities. Their communities are by definition going to be smaller. They're going to be done in different ways. So I'm not suggesting that JCCs replace synagogues. I don't think that would be a great idea, and I don't think it's going to happen. What I do think is that collectively we can think about how do we serve our community at large. We all have a role to play, and it's not by restricting what an institution can do. We should all be urging institutions to be as much and deliver as much as they can, as long as they do it well, as long as they do it with excellence, and as long as they do it with dignity and respect and are uplifting our entire community. So, just to sum up, again, you're the Kohanim of the 21st century. Don't forget that. We're going to get bumper stickers. And we're going to put it on and send it out. And the JCCs are vitally important institutions within the Jewish world. I know you know that. If you didn't, you wouldn't have taken the job that you're in today, right? And I know that you know intellectually that it's true, and that the community feels that way. But that certainly isn't the way they talk about your institution most of the time. Right? Most of the time, it seems to me, people talk about what the JCC isn't. Right? It's not this, it doesn't do enough of that, right? We have to figure out a way collectively, communally, not just you, but communally, how do we change the conversation? How do we change the messaging? The JCCs are not the past, the JCCs are the future. That's where the energy is going to come from. That's where the future leaders are going to come from. Whether, we were talking today, whether they're come out of the preschools, or the kindergartens, or the day schools that are housed in JCCs, or the summer camps that are coming to counselors, or all the other kinds of programs that come out. That's where leaders are going to come from. So we are building the Jewish community of the future. We need to embrace it. We need to celebrate it. We need to be proud about it. And as I said to the board last year, and I say to you, I will do everything I can in my position to help champion JCCs and help you explain to the rest of the community how vital you are to the success and vibrancy of Jewish life. Todah Rabbah for what you do. even from Baltimore.
This is not a shy group.
So, Peter Blair from Charlotte. So you spoke to the synagogue movement and the conversations that you believe we should be having around religious observance or religious services at JCCs. Can you speak to the reaction that you've gotten as you speak to that point in different communities, and if anything, a learning or a thread that runs through them that helps us to break through that barrier?
I wish I could. I can't really. I know in Tulsa, I was involved in lots of those conversations, and it also it involved not just the religious activities. It also involved preschool issues, negotiating between Jewish preschools and where the preschools would be. So I don't have any learning on it. But my sense is that we're at a time and place where there's a different conversation, where there can be a different conversation today than there was a decade ago. I think the JCCs are in a stronger position than they were. I think many synagogues are in a weaker position than they were. And I think the whole notion of community lends to that conversation. That's one. Second thing is that we are all familiar with, what's the word I'm looking for? Emerging minyanim, right? We're all looking for emerging communities that are spiritually based, that are very proud, in most cases, that they start small and they're not burdened by a building, which is great until they need a building. And then they suddenly, so they're starting to look more like the synagogues that they said they would never look like, because the synagogues also thought, right, that when they started. But nonetheless, there are lots of emerging minyanim all over that I think of the JCC system on a community basis, which is so you'll be meeting a community need. They're not necessarily going to go to the synagogues. And I understand why the synagogues wouldn't want them, but you could be nurturing and fostering these emerging spiritual communities. And I think that meets a communal need, and so I think the conversation is different. So you have to understand the context of each and every community. I think it's different in every community, who the players are, where the strengths are, but I think there are opportunities. My guess is there are opportunities, and if there aren't, we need to make them.
Hi, Mark Shapiro, JCC Milwaukee. We were one of the pilots for Leading Edge, and thank you, by the way, for the foundation's support. Next steps in it. Now it's becoming this extremely hyper-powerful tool. It's giving us information that, quite honestly, JCCs and nonprofits have never had access to, giving us pathways to be able to try and solve problems, even actually know them before they're there. Next steps, are there opportunities to identify pipelines for talent within all of the Jewish communities, organizations? Best practices, why are certain organizations killing it in certain areas? Any idea what those next steps are, since you guys are such a huge part of it?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the kind words about Leading Edge. I know that Gali came down and presented to your board, and working with Gali is a real pleasure. She is just an outstanding professional. With regard to the future of Leading Edge, we want to first double down on the things that we're doing well, that we think we're doing well, and the field is telling us that we're doing well. We want to try every way we can to maximize the value of the survey. We are trying to figure out, we want to keep expanding it so there's more and more data, and that organizations will take it several times so they'll be able to see the changes that they're making. We want to find ways to highlight the bright spots of organizations that are doing some things well. We want to think about how do we help organizations that want to do better, where do they find the consultative assistance that may help them do that. There's a little conversation in-house about whether that's something Leading Edge itself should do. I think it's premature for that, but there's a possibility of something like that happening. So we hope to use the survey and continue building on the early success of the survey and figuring out how do we help it be as helpful to all of you as it possibly can be. With regard to the talent pool, there were two programs we had at Schusterman that when Leading Edge came into existence, we offloaded, if you will. I don't mean that in a pejorative way, I mean in a positive way, to Leading Edge, because we wanted it to be much more communally based than just based at a foundation that had a limited number of grantees. The second piece of it was something called Career Hub. And you'll be hearing more from Career Hub from Leading Edge soon. Career Hub, the reason we started Career Hub is because one day somebody asked me if I knew a young person who could fill a job somewhere. And we didn't have an internal system at Schusterman to do that. And I said, if we're finding all these outstanding young adults who care about Jewish community, and we're saying how great we are at doing this, and then when someone calls from a JCC and I can't give them a name, perhaps we should stop patting ourselves in the back for such a great job we're doing. So I said, we need to find a system where we can do that. So we did, and we brought somebody in. We started this Career Hub, to help us be able to identify people for jobs, but also then our networks pushed back and said, we'd like you to help us find jobs. So we had it both ways. Organizations were interested. At Leading Edge, I think where we're going to go at Leading Edge is much more from the organizational side. That is, the organizations will be the client, and we want to figure out how we can help, perhaps be a matchmaking shidduch program for people who are looking for jobs. How do we encourage people? We're familiar with the field, Jewish jobs and all the rest of it. We don't want to cause challenges within the community, but we want to make sure that you are able to get your jobs and others out there so people are familiar with it, and we want to be able to help do our part in perhaps helping you the best pool of candidates. So we're working on it, and then the last piece is, of course, we want to try and really through the survey, we want to really understand how do we have great places to work. We know, I'm sure it's true in JCCs and in others, the attrition rate of young people who come into our field, whether it's not just JCCs, it's everywhere, second, third year, they tend to move out, and many of them don't come back. We need to address that issue directly because we need to retain a lot more people. It'll be a lot less expensive and much more efficient to retain those people and to make them feel good. So even if they do leave to go to graduate school or whatever, or pursue some other career, they'll come back to the Jewish program. So those are probably the ways we're thinking.
Thank you.
Hi, so now that you're leaving your role as a grant maker, I wonder if you can offer any insights into what you've seen in general Jewish philanthropists are looking at as being the most important initiatives coming up to support this Jewish future that we all know is shifting.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's sad that 25 years after I started, that when you ask me a question about Jewish philanthropists, I think about 10 organizations. It was 10 organizations in 1994. It's 10 organizations now. Some are the same, most are different. Schusterman is one constant. That's very disappointing because there should be 50 or 60 or 70, but there aren't. So that's the bad news. The good news is I think that Jewish philanthropy, that's at the national level and international. I think my sense is that Jewish philanthropy at the local level has really progressed and is much better. Of course, the federation system has its challenges and you all could always use more resources and all of that. But nonetheless, I think there's a broader pool of more Jewishly literate philanthropists in the local community than we've had before. And I think that's a positive and that's a building block. At the national level, I think the key is finding out what the big players who care, what do they care about, and where do you fit? So I'm thinking Jim Joseph Foundation, Schusterman, of course, Jim Joseph Foundation, my Maimonides Fund, Mark I know was here, Davidson, Marcus, you know the names. And I would say that all of us are still a little too idiosyncratic for the benefit of the community. We need to do better. I think those foundations need to do better in terms of communicating between and among themselves, in terms of collaborating between and among themselves, understanding what they really care about, where they'll fund, because I think if we have those conversations more effectively, we'll be able to spread the resources that are already significant going out. We can eliminate some duplication, some replication. So, and those conversations are taking place. So, but that's new. It's relatively new within the last 12 to 18 months. So I'm excited by that because I really like my colleagues in the foundation world, and I think they really, the newer set, and I think certainly, I hasten to add, the newer federation executives have a very different perspective of what it means to be a federation executive, of how to handle and run their communities. Their jobs are second only to yours in challenging and complication. They just have more money, so people are nicer to them. But I think we're really beginning to see that, and so I think that's the direction. The direction is among the funding community, within the funding community, you're seeing more conversation, more collaboration, more cooperation, which I hope will yield benefits to the community.
Sandy, it's definitely great to see you're evolving, thinking about the JCC movement over like the last half a decade. And I want to help us dig a little deeper around the federation system. I know for many of my colleagues, it's a real fight relationship. They don't see the platform that you just articulated. I think all of us would love to see you give that talk as the keynote at next year's GA, so they would understand what JCCs can be in terms of a platform, in terms of engagement and